are ready, you just let me know.
Ready.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm just gonna. I don't have like a PowerPoint. I usually talk from some sort of PowerPoint, but I have one here on my computer that we recently wrote a white paper for the World Bank Land and Poverty Conference. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the land administration challenges and solutions there. I'll talk a little bit about what Ubitquity is, what the Ubitquity platform prototype does, and then where I see a lot of these different types of solutions going, and I think if you guys want to do some question and answer, and I think that's a good format for me. I hope it's good for you. Um, so, I'll start. I'll talk a little bit about how where this idea came from. I guess last fall we were discussing different applications for blockchain, non-financial specific applications for blockchains, and we were discussing, I guess, like virtual notaries and how do you notarize all of your documents? How do you have them stored? And you got to do identity, and we then we started shifting gears towards real estate. How do you track the title of something, and how can it be applied to blockchains or Bitcoin blockchains? And that was really what we landed on with Ubitquity, and just started researching as much as we possibly could about the current title system, the current real estate system, and where some of those inefficiencies are, and where and how we think blockchain can be applied. Because it's one thing to say, okay, the data's on the blockchain. It's another thing to say this adds value because, right? And so in a lot of real estate transactions and in tracking title, there's a lot of missing pieces, missing liens, missing or long processes in contracts and smart contracts. And in a commercial real estate deal, you could have, I don't know if you can see my face, but you can have a really big stack of papers, and that contract can be passed around to a lot of different parties, but a lot of times it's really the end signature thing that matters, end signature page that matters, and that's passed around in emails. And if there's 10 different people that need to sign it, maybe they didn't actually get the last version. There could be missing pieces of information that weren't conveyed to everyone. You can have can also have people create a fraudulent deed, a fraudulent way of conveying the title or the ownership. And if they present that to the county or other people, then you can there's massive amounts of fraud that happen. I think it's about $1 billion worth a year in the U.S. alone, where real estate fraud or conveyance fraud happens. And so we said, well, what if all of those different types of documents were kind of on one platform, and the ownership of a specific title was represented by a token. And so we started looking at the different smart token applications on the blockchain, or smart like colored coins, and you can do stuff with Ethereum. But I guess last fall Ethereum was still super new. It's still super new, but less tools were developed. And we decided to say, well, okay, so if we can color this token and say it represents the ownership, or eventually represents the ownership of a title, we could get all of the parties together and associate all of the deeds of trust, all of the contracts, and hash them to the blockchain associated with that title. And it would all be in one place, and you could see when different parties had done work on that piece of property. So, for example, if you had a title company, you had a bank, you had a real estate, some sort of other real estate broker or agent, and they wanted to do a title search, and let's say this system is being used a couple years down the road, you could go to the Block Explorer, the Colored Coins Block Explorer, and you could see that, it's a mutable record, so you could see that at, on May 18th at 10:49 p.m., someone did a title search and it was this company, and you could see that, and they would publicly reveal their public key that they've, done some sort of search or done some sort of work. And you could see that work has been done on an immutable transaction, and you could go back and have at least some certainty that that this title was searched at a certain period of time, or that someone had signed off. And that was really kind of where the idea came from and where the platform came from. I don't know, I'm kind of going all over the place here. And yeah, and so if you can track that title with the token, the more times that it's transferred to the proper owner or signed off, the more kind of we would assume the more times that you would have at least a trusted party has signed off on it and transferred it, and the more certainty you would have potentially that that the owner is the correct owner. The more people have looked at that information and verified it. Yeah.
So do you want us to ask questions as you go along, or do you want us to
I would love to have questions, because I feel very disconjointed here with the group. Like, I'm not in front of everyone, and I have like this little phone window here. So
So my question is, I know some of the people over at Factum, and I know that they have announced, at least at one point, they announced a partnership with the Guatemalan government, I believe it was, to do some kind of land registry application. And
yeah, the Honduran government.
Honduras, sorry. And in the context for that is that in a lot of third world countries, they have really inferior title systems to what we have here, and they have a really strong need. Whereas here in the US, the system could be better, but it's pretty well established and pretty well trusted. Do you see like a particular target market, or how are you, where's your initial focus going to be? Which
with
market? And
with Ubitquity, oh, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
And with which market and which partners would you have to do that?
So with Ubitquity, we're not going after developing nations. We can kind of, in the paper that we wrote for the World Bank, it was a broad paper based on land administration and blockchains, and where myself and the two other co-authors at the World Bank thought that blockchains would apply, would or could apply in the future to different land administration challenges. And that was one thing. I do think that what Factom and what some other, I think Bitfury is doing something with the Georgian government as well. So with what Factom was trying to do was basically say, with Epigraph, they were trying to say, we're going to single part of the registration process, and we're going to have an identifier, the different people in the office, we're going to have an identifier of them on the blockchain, and every single part of the process is going to be hashed, right? And it's going to be then put onto, assume the Factom blockchain, which is then secured into the Bitcoin blockchain, anchored into the Bitcoin or whatever blockchain it is, doesn't matter. And that wouldn't necessarily prevent fraud from happening by any means, but it would provide a proof of process and a proof of integrity of the data later on. So when, if one of the employees there put in a fraudulent piece of data, and then it comes to light, a couple months later when the actual owner comes in and tries to do something, they can go back to that. There's no one that can go back and change the database and say, no, this is what, because all those changes are going to be tracked. And so you have that proof of process, and they can say, all right, this guy over here, he was the one that put the fraudulent data in, and we now have someone to go back, go after in terms of the in the fraud. Now you have to have then a non-corrupt legal system, and that there are still challenges there. But the point of what they were trying to do was provide the basis for a proof of process using blockchains as the notarization of every step, and they think that would deter some of at least the crime, and it doesn't happen overnight. It would happen over a long period of time. I hope that answers your question with what Factom and Epigraph were doing, and they think are still doing. I don't know. They're kind of quiet on what's going on now, which makes sense.
So, can you describe how are you going to focus on the U.S. market then, or another developed country, or?
Yeah. So we're working on the U.S. market. We're working to look at. We're working with lots of different parties that are interested in seeing what they can do with the platform. We're interested in putting U.S. title information and county recorder information and new transactions onto the blockchain, representing it as a token, and having all of that information then stored in there as a publicly referenceable, or not all of the information, but whatever the form fields they want to put on the metadata on that token. What we are still looking at different user requirements to say, what really adds value to these different clients. So the title companies, the banks, the county recorders. That's going to be a long sales cycle for a county recorder to come in and use blockchain software, right? As well as, really a lot of these kind of startup jurisdictions that are starting to occur, startup jurisdictions and small, nimble governments in Europe that may be interested in tracking the title ownership of something on the blockchain. We're open to doing that, but the user requirements in the developed markets, they're not there yet. Or the value prop of, if I put all of my data here, why would I pay you specifically for for this service? And I can get into some of the different value props that we have proposed and we think that will be valuable in the future.
So can you give us an overview of where you are in the process? It sounds like you're pretty early in the development process, where you're building out architecture and white papers. Do you have an implementation? Do you have a pilot project? Where, what kind of time frame are you guys working on with your plans?
We are in the beginning. We have a prototype where you can register properties on the using Color. You can register properties on the Colored Coins blockchain, and then from there we're getting pilot users. So we have some pilot users that are about to come on and want to experiment with it in the next month. Was only released about a month and a half ago, I think. And so we've been talking with a lot of different parties and getting them on there. But this month we have there's a couple different specific title companies, and then some other ones that are going on and testing it and saying, well, these features are really valuable to us, these features are not valuable to us. But it's definitely not a system that, as of right now, wouldn't be something that they're paying for. We're giving it out for free. We want them to mess around with it. We want them to test it. And we have several of them going on there now.
I have a question.
Question from
Yep.
Jim.
Do you use the concept of a deal room? And the reason I'm asking is, one of the big benefits is transparency. One of the big selling points for blockchain is transparency. Yet the transactions in real estate and financial transactions are private, and people are concerned about their privacy and the confidentiality of those transactions. What's your thoughts on that intersection between transparency and privacy?
Right, and so the different bodies that are going to be, and this is how we envision it, and it may change. And it's the difference between, I guess, a permissioned ledger or a non-permissioned ledger. So we have to have it as permissioned. You can't just have anyone going on there and registering their property as I own the World Trade Center, right? That doesn't work. The deals would then still be in private. This doesn't replace the current system. This is putting all of those documents, all of those on there at once, hashing them, and then creating a permanent record in parallel to the existing system, so that we hope that integration eventually comes later on in the process. And so all of these deals are going to be private. The only thing that is public are the hashes of the documents and whatever form fields you want to put on the colored coin blockchain. So you can put different form fields, the name, the address, the year built, the link to the county recorder, and any other kind of maybe plot information about all of that. You can put those into the form field because the colored coins blockchain has a torrent layer underneath for the metadata.
I had a question kind of on this vein, following up with this idea of gatekeepers. And gatekeepers, the gatekeeper model applies to almost anything having to do with information flow. You pay me to either get information or distribute information or to hold information. So what I'm asking is, my understanding of, again, what he's talking about is transparency. It is also what I'm trying to determine. The way I see the value of this is not so much that the gatekeepers will lose value completely, and essentially this will be completely a commoditized process, but that I can have access, and there's the transparency. I can get on and search literally anything, any property or anything having to do with that property. Is that right? I don't have to be, a banker, a realtor. I don't have to necessarily be engaged in the process of transferring and buying property. But if I have information about, or if I need information about the property, I can get on. I can go directly to the database that has this information. Does that make sense?
So, I mean, yeah, that makes sense. So if only if the information is going to be public anyway. So if all the information that would be stored anyway is public, then yes. But you would still want to have, if there were portions of the deal that didn't want to be made public or that weren't of public record, I would assume that you would want some sort of managed system so that you can have access control.
Well, the reason I'm bringing this up is, the basis of all fraud is sequestering information. So if in other words, fraud is by its very nature, withholding information that I have that I don't want other people to have. So when you say, there are certainly there are going to be some things that are private, of course, and some aspects of transactions that are private. But transparency doesn't occur unless I can follow what's actually happened with a particular property or a particular transaction. Isn't that what this is about?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We want as much transparency. We want everything recorded and make sure that every single piece of information that needs to be there is there. And then all of that system is then permanently stored in the system. So it's not dependent upon Ubitquity, it's dependent upon the distributed decentralized layer underneath. But but yeah, you would want to have all the information, and you would want to make sure that all of the information that's valid is there. But that's not something that we would necessarily be ensuring. We have no way of ensuring that all of that information is there. It would be the parties that are involved and making sure that they put that on there.
Right. So I'm not saying it's Ubitquity's responsibility. I'm just saying that, you know, when you have essentially an open source, then the access is, you know, that's the whole point of having an open source, is that there's, you know, shared responsibility.
Right, and so the information is encrypted underneath, peer-to-peer encrypted, all of that information. The only thing that's public and open source would be the hashes that would then are stored onto the blockchain, and that I mean, it's there, but you wouldn't, the information wouldn't be open to the public because it's all encrypted.
Right. Yeah.
So Matt, Sean here. I just want to say that the pizza arrived, and I have to give a shout out to our sponsor,
Awesome.
Pat Riley of the Intellectual Property Society, is our pizza sponsor for this evening. You can find him at
Looks delicious.
yes. So that's Patrick Riley, IP Society. Next time you're here in town, we can get you a slice of pizza, Matt. So my question is,
Sweet. Well, I'll be there in July.
oh, come down to Santa Cruz. We'd love to see you. So
Excellent.
could you walk us through like an actual, transaction or a use case as to what, like in your pilot program, what like a kind of a typical case? I mean, since you're starting out as something that's sort of a replica of or something on the side of the existing system, how does it tie into the existing system, and how would somebody use it? I mean, let's say that I'm selling a house. Where who are the different players that would get involved? The buyer, the seller, the agents, the title company, and what parts of the transaction do you think would be handled in these pilot projects?
So,
And Cam adds, how do you get commissions?
You're saying you can't just say you're the Eiffel Tower or something.
Yeah.
So someone gives you permission to submit. That's fine.
Okay, I'm assuming that what he's doing is he's using the title company to make a declaration of who owns what.
Yeah.
But if you could make sure that's covered in the use case, that would be great, Matt.
yeah. So in our vision of these use cases, if a title company is working a deal out and there's different parties, they would put all of the existing information onto and register a property, whether it's a property that was just built or maybe the existing information. If they did a title search and they have all of that information there, they would register a property onto here, and they would put all of the PDFs that are associated, so the deeds of trust, all of the different liens, all of that, and they associate with them with this specific token that can be referenced. They fill out all the different form fields, and then that is then stored forever, so that they know that that's all there. Now, we can envision
so
in
let
the
me ask you a
future that if you
when you talk about a token,
Yep, go ahead.
is there a colored coin token that represents a specific property?
Yes.
And are there any other tokens?
And what our system can do.
So there's one colored coin per.
As of right now, Sorry, I think we're on a delay here, a lag. We keep interrupting each other. Go ahead.
Oh, so there's one token per property. Are there any other tokens in the system that represent things other than properties? Or when you talk about a token, are you specifically talking about one token, one property?
So if one token, one property, but I mean, you can also then do multi-party ownership. in this. We could do the features where if someone owned a specific portion of something, you could have that portion of ownership. But right now, with our current system, and the token represents the property, and then you can write information that exists now against that token, and all the information that it should be for that token or that property is then aggregated onto the system for it. But if I transfer that token to you now, that doesn't mean anything. But we envision that all of that information would eventually be ownership.
Now, in the pilot phase, who would hold the ownership? Who would hold the private key for a particular token?
We definitely would want to do a multi-signature wallet, and so that multiple parties can sign off that they have done different things. As of right now, we would want it to be the title companies, the financial institutions. The end users, in our opinion, won't be the first types of different customers to do that. But it said as it evolves, as we develop those types of things, it may be different, especially as we develop the different permissions in the system. And a lot of that is unknown right now.
So when would a token be created? Would somebody go through and take a particular region and start creating tokens for all properties in that region? Or would you do it on a transaction by transaction basis? Or, what's sort of the onboarding process for bringing real estate tokens onto the blockchain?
So, that's a really, really good question. We're testing a lot of different ways. So none of this is going to be, it's a really good question. So we're bringing on people that have lots of data and that want to put those data representing those tokens. If we can get a big enough player, let's say you get a county recorder that really wants to put all of its information onto here, then you would have them, signing that all of this information is there and correct, and you would have them trusted. But in terms of the onboarding process now, we're having people test it. We're having people see what types of bugs and what types of features may be valuable. But the onboarding process is come test it with us.
What is the searching for the title to do with the strength of the transaction or whatever? I was saying something about searching and counting the number of searches.
So Cam's asking about logging searches on the blockchain. Why are you logging searches on the blockchain?
Wait, logging searches? I don't understand. You mean like
something about searching titles and that was weird or something?
Yeah, is any kind of a search process Cam's asking if the search process itself creates data that goes onto the blockchain?
So if you did a title search and you had all of that information, you could upload that onto the token that could represent the title in the future, but it represents the property. And if that was transferred as the property was owned in the future to different people, you could easily see the record of the title of ownership transfer to different people. And we envision that in the future, all property title searches would be really easy because you would just go back through the transactional history of that token that represents the title to the property. And you wouldn't have to go through the county recorder to see all of the, do expensive title searches when you could track the ownership through each account all the way back to the original.
So let me see if I can rephrase that a little bit. if I understand correctly. So what you're talking about doing is when somebody does a offline or an existing type of title search, you would basically use that as an opportunity to record that data onto the blockchain tied to a specific colored coin real estate token. Is that correct?
Yeah, we would want to do that. Yep.
Okay, so essentially, I'm searching, if I want to do a search on a property that I'm interested in, and again, I understand, I mean, I'm not necessarily a realtor, I'm not involved in the transaction directly, I'm shopping, I'm looking. Basically, I understand that there's the property I'm interested has a corresponding token. So when I search, I'm searching under that token, and all the information connected with that is on the blockchain. So essentially, I'm getting everything. I'm getting all of the available information, publicly available information, that about that property by doing the search of a particular token that represents that property.
Yeah, that's the vision. Yeah.
So everything that has been done that is pertinent, everything that is connected to that property is connected to that token. And so essentially, I'm entering I'm having access to all of the information that would otherwise be in different locations.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Yep.
in different systems. So yeah, I could see, that would be a huge efficiency.
You remember the movie Chinatown?
That's the goal, and so this is very new. We're seeing whether that happens. So one of the things that was really, really cool that I read recently was, and I don't even know if I have it up here, was kind of like, what is life like in 2030 in a blockchain-enabled world? And there was this blog post, and they go over this guy who's basically, searching for the title, whether who owns what, and he talks into his phone, who owns 123 Pleasant Street, and it goes back and it searches through all those different things, and it would make a title search basically happen instantaneously because you could see all of that. So,
Wow.
I have a couple quick questions. How big
Yeah.
are the tokens, data-wise? And also, is like the price of the property public?
so what was it was hard to hear.
He asked two questions. The first is, how big are the tokens? And the second question is the price information recorded, and is it recorded publicly?
So what do you mean by how big? Like how much of a Bitcoin, or
How many bytes of data? How many bytes of data?
I don't know off the top of my head. The colored coin, the Colu uses a torrent layer for all the metadata underneath, so you can have whatever transactional data that you want. It's not limited like the Bitcoin blockchain, because you can associate whatever metadata you want with it. And then, what was the second question again? I'm sorry.
Well, I'll ask a follow-up on the first question, and then we'll get to the second one. Who seeds those torrents? If there's torrents out there hosting the data, how do we know that data is going to remain online? Is there somebody, is the title company, or is that something you guys are going to do? Who's going to make sure that information remains online?
So as of right now, that's something that Colu does, and they're based out of Israel. But yeah, you could definitely have trusted parties in terms of title companies, or a network of a consortium of different organizations that would run the seed torrents. You could potentially set it up, I would assume, on some cloud storage, or maybe IPFS at some point, some decentralized storage solution, and do it that way. But as of right now, yeah, you're right. It's Colu that runs that seed, and we could run one as well.
what incentives does COU have to maintain? I mean, if you start putting title data, it can be pretty big from the paperwork I remember going through. What economic incentive is there for COU to host and continue to host that data?
Yeah, as of right now, I don't know the answer to that question. There would definitely be a solution that we would need to figure out in the future. I would imagine I would imagine you'd be able to set up lots of instances of that spread out, so you're not relying on one central party.
Okay, and then I haven't forgotten Cam's second question, which is there price information recorded? And if so, is that information available publicly, or when is it available publicly? When and if it's available publicly?
I mean, we wouldn't mandate whether the price information is recorded publicly. I mean, if the parties choose to make that private, then that wouldn't be something that we would put on there. But I mean, if it's mandatory under some sort of law, then you would want to put that. But this is a parallel system, so I don't know. We're not going to put the price data on unless the parties want to. That wouldn't be something that we wouldn't really decide that.
What's your experience with legal recognition of assets with that?
So Jeffrey asks, what's your experience with the process to get legal recognition of transactions on the blockchain? What would be involved in getting legal recognition of that transfer?
I don't think that that's going to happen anytime soon. What I would say is that in the future, there may be some law that catches up with the technology once there's a robust technology blockchain system for title that says, hey, you must put all of your information on the blockchain title system, just like you must go record all of your information at the county recorder, kind of if you're going to transfer ownership. But yeah, we don't have a process to make that legal. I do think that governments will start to do this in the next 5 years themselves, regardless of whether Ubitquity is the one that does that. I think that the technology will be used to track ownership of property. It just makes sense to me.
Well, so for now, are you using something like that says this event is sort of go on blockchain and legally transfer this asset, something like that? Or I'm just curious, like what?
I'm not sure if the mic's going to pick you up from back there. I don't know if I can rephrase that question. Can you one more time, and I'll try to repeat it. So
what are you using now in order to? I'm having a hard time. Just
A contractual agreement between the two parties, which states this information is public and this information is private.
No, contractual. Are you like how do you write contractual agreements which are like, all right, when this thing happens on the blockchain, then I transfer this property to you?
I don't think they're doing that. I think what they're doing now is they're just working on trying to record the data onto the blockchain as kind of an audit trail or a read-only mirror of what's happening in the real world. I don't think they're doing anything where it actually triggers a real transaction depending on it.
Okay.
You're correct. We are not, and you're thinking far in the future. You're thinking of how it should work in the future when this is all robust. Yeah, we are not saying that this will represent the transaction in any legal terms at this point. But yeah, if you have that whole entire audit trail, you're there. But one thing that you can do for kind of like a smart lease kind of program, and this is a feature that I think would be really beneficial in the future, where you can have kind of you can have the lease of an agreement and do a smart contract where the deposit on some sort of the security deposit would be put into kind of a separate multi-sig wallet, and then at the end you could do smart contracts and smart leases like that. And there's a couple different people out there that are writing real estate smart contracts. So I think something like that would be could be represented later on.
So it seems like, from my knowledge of the audience here, it's mostly people more from the cryptography and the cryptocurrency and Bitcoin space. Jim has some experience, but we don't have any realtors here. And I was wondering if you could put it into cryptocurrency term, and if you could tell us, in the current system, if we were to imagine the current real estate system as a multi-signature key or some kind of a transaction, who holds the private keys? Is ultimately it the county recorder that, that says who owns what, and then there's various processes where the title company, there's a title company, there's a county recorder, and then there's various legal processes where somebody could appeal and reverse a transaction, I assume, if there was some fraud or something like that. Can you describe to us how that works in kind of a crypto-like way, as to who would the different parties be on a multi-signature transaction, and what would be involved in reversing a transaction, or some kind of overview of the way it works from that perspective?
Could I add?
Oh,
yeah. I mean, go ahead. Good.
From what I understand, you're modeling the current legal workflow for a real estate transaction. Is that correct? And you're just using blockchain and the other tools as a mechanism to implement the existing workflow. You're not creating a new workflow. Is that correct?
We haven't created any new workflow. That is correct. But we don't expect we expect to basically be a parallel system, and that can add features that may eliminate third parties that are not necessary later on. So, for example, if a large financial institution wanted to use something like this to track their own title and kind of cut out title insurance companies, that would be something that we would be interested in providing for them. But as of right now, we are not. We are a completely parallel system to put all of the data on in one place, and we hope that prevents that if you have another place to go and say, well, we've put all this data here, let's go back and look at it a couple of years later, or what does the blockchain say? Then that would be helpful for them, and then that can turn into something where, if you don't need to trust a third party to hold something for you, let's say your down payment or something like that, if you can put that in a multi-sig, that would be something. Yes, right now we're not redesigning how real estate transaction happens.
So could you kind of describe what a crypto, to get back to the first part of this question, what would a cryptocurrency style transaction that models a U.S. real estate transaction look like? Let me make a stab at it. So ultimately, it's the county recorder that signs off on the transaction. So
Well, buyer and seller have to come together.
right.
And hammer out, negotiate the terms and conditions.
Right. So there's the buyer and the seller have to sign it. The title company is actually provides title insurance, right? They basically charge a fee. They do a bunch of research, and then they say if we screwed up and the transaction is fraudulent in some way or something's wrong, then we guarantee that. And then the county recorder ultimately it has the final say that says, okay, the transaction's final. This person is now the registered owner. But then, of course, someone can sue, and through the legal process, what Nick Szabo calls, the wet contracts or the wet legal system, a reference to wetware. Then the transaction could be reversed or changed. Am I barking up the right tree? Could you clarify how that works in that kind of a terminology for us?
Yes, I mean, ultimately, whatever the county recorder, whoever goes to the county recorder and records that transfer of ownership, then they're the ones that hold the private key. They're the centralized third party, right? I think you described it pretty well. All the parties come together. There's usually lawyers that are signing and forming these different contracts with the specific requirements. There's a title company that usually sees certain parts of the process in terms of doing the search.
We lost him.
There's am I back?
You got to repeat that last paragraph or so because the connection dropped out. Sorry.
Okay. So the buyers and sellers come together. There are usually lawyers involved in terms of drawing up the contracts, and they will still, in a lot of cases, I think will still need to be involved to mediate, because usually the buyer and seller are not experts in real estate negotiations. The title company kind of oversees a lot of the process, makes sure all of that information is still there, is there and is correct, and then there's also title insurance, which is mandated specifically usually by the financier, saying, all right, well, we still own a part of this thing, and if there's any errors or omissions, we want to be protected, and you want to be protected. So there's those fees, and then there's the county recorder that ultimately goes and records all of that. There's also notaries involved, which, I mean, basically in the United States, what a lot of notaries do are just saying, yeah, you were here and you're alive and you're not under duress. And this is the information that existed at this time, which, other than you're not under duress, is essentially what a blockchain hash does, right? In terms of notarizing a piece of information. So I think that there's room for those, potentially some of those parties to have, especially the notary, to have less of a role in that. And as smart contracts grow tremendously, and they may have, you may be able to have different smart contracts that are drawn up that are pretty easy to see, and then maybe the lawyers have somewhat of less of a job. But I don't know if that answers your question.
That's good. That helps. Genevieve has
still humans provide some sort of validation. Who's to say someone can't put false information into the blockchain now? But say somebody uses it. What's that? But say they're not the real people making the contract. Say somebody is deliberately being fraudulent and they represent themselves as somebody that they're not.
Mistakes.
Yeah, so what happens? What happens if you have false information? Whether it's nefarious or whether it's completely accidental?
So I said we're still going to be relying on, if false information, we can go back and make edits to those pieces of information. In terms of, you would still have that audit trail. You'd be able to see what edits were made and when. In terms of falsifying information, we're not just allowing any person to come on and do this on this system, and there will be identification processes. We'll need to have probably KYC and AML, and probably even more identification things in terms of when the companies are doing that. And we don't have that specifically all figured out yet. Yeah. So the false information can be there, but we're still relying on trusted parties within the transaction to be providing accurate information on the system, just like they would be in the transaction without the system.
How much harder would it though to prove that that's false information in the blockchain as opposed to going down to the county recorders and going, oh, this is false, and they go, oh yeah, oops, we do this all the time. I mean, since the blockchain, since obviously you're claiming that humans make mistakes, the blockchain doesn't. And so in a secure way, what is it, if I come and go, oh, I got screwed, somebody falsified this information or whatever, how much more screwed am I with blockchain than I am with the human? Just curious.
I mean, I would say that if false information was provided, you would be able to see exactly who provided that false information. Who's the public key that put that on there, right? What entity is doing that? Just like in the Factum example, in terms of the proof of process, what user, what trusted third party is putting that false in there? And then, I mean, this is just a parallel system, so it doesn't. I wouldn't say that it replaces it. Ultimately, whatever the governmental body decides is the right record is going to be the one that is going to be used in that area, in that jurisdiction. It doesn't matter what the blockchain says unless it's a monetary transaction but ultimately it wouldn't be accepted by the government jurisdiction without some way of reversing that or editing it.
Would the token allow for modifications to whether the information was fraudulent or not? Would the token allow for users to modify the data?
Would the token allow for modifications, and then you kind of broke up?
Just of the data that's being stored on the blockchain.
Did we lose him?
I'm hearing like half sentences.
Okay, well, so the question, let me rephrase the question. The question is, who is going to have permission to make changes to the data related to a specific token?
That's a good question. I would say that the parties that are registering, some of the title companies and the financial institutions that are registering that information, that have an interest and an incentive to put the correct information on this system that they're.
So what you're describing, let me try to use some terminology to describe what the system that, as I hear it, is you're running on top of colored coins, which are a permissionless system like Bitcoin itself, but you're building a permissioned model on top of that where only certain parties are going to be able to create transactions that are valid within your system. Is that correct?
We have a member management platform where, yes, where not everyone can sign up and do it, because I don't see how that works in terms of registering and putting in, how do you prevent from people putting falsified information on there without having some sort of permissioned access control layer where these different parties can register and go through the identification process and then put their information onto it. You're still writing the information to the Bitcoin blockchain, and you're still using colored coins to represent the digital asset, but it's not a private blockchain.
You asked, who owns the private key? So all this information is hashed, and who at that point, between the seller, the buyer, the title company, ultimately I think the recorder is gonna validate the transaction. But in that group of parties, who owns the private key that hashed that transaction?
As of right now, I'm not necessarily sure. I think it will be a private key owned by multiple parties to sign off on the transactions. I think there will be a multi-sig. They will all own a piece of that. As of right now, that it's not something that has been necessarily figured out, because if it's just the owner that owns a private key, he can do whatever he wants. It would have to be a kind of a governance model amongst all of the different people, and it would have to be multiple signatures.
I have a question. When a transaction occurs, is part of the coin broken up and then sold someplace temporarily and then sold back again, or how does that work? Is that a dumb question?
I mean, sold, like the Bitcoin is sold, or the
colored coin. So there's one colored coin that represents the property. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah.
So when anybody wants to add any information, there has to be some sort of transaction. I'm wondering how much of the colored coin is split off for that, or if like who owns what, and do they trade it to themselves, or does it like go somewhere and go back again? How does that work?
I would have to ask my CTO.
Let me take a stab at answering that. I believe what will happen is there would be a colored coin that represents the property, and then there would be non-colored Bitcoins which would be used to pay the transaction fees and to fund the transaction.
Okay, thank you.
If the colored coin is only an identifier.
Yeah.
Account identifier.
Does that sound right, Matt?
I bet that's right.
Yeah, that sounds right. Like I said, I would really have to ask my CTO.
So it has nothing, yeah, the transactions themselves have nothing to do with the colored coin.
The Bitcoin transactions will contain some regular Bitcoin to pay the fees, but there will be, I assume that there's a colored coin that represents the property, and that needs to move. So if that moves to another if that goes into a transaction output and goes to a new address, then that would be the symbolic transferring of ownership of the asset. But in terms of the regular Bitcoin transaction and getting change and all that, that would be handled with non-colored coins. And I'm familiar with the one of the colored coin. It's Coin Prism. What is the most common colored coin protocol? I'm drawing a blank. There's a particular spec, and I've read that spec, and there's basically a mapping of input transactions to output transactions by order. So they'll know which output address got the colored coin. They'll know which the protocol will specify which output address got the change for the Bitcoin that's funding the non-colored Bitcoin that's funding the transaction. I think that would be how it would work. No, it's just, I'll look it up after the thing's over, but it's there's a colored coin protocol. It's called Polychrome or Chroma. There's a standard that a lot of colored coin people implement. I don't think Kolu that they're using uses that standard. I think it's another colored coin implementation.
I think there's an open assets protocol.
Open assets. Yes.
Yeah.
Open assets protocol is what I'm thinking of. Does Kolu use open assets protocol?
They use the colored coins application. I don't know. I would really have to ask my CTO on all this.
If they don't, they use something fairly simple. So I think we're about at time. I have kind of one follow-up question I'm saving unless anybody else has any other questions. Anybody? So let's talk about Ethereum. Well, I guess the question would be, you used colored coins to do it, and now Ethereum's becoming a big deal and seems like it could be useful for this type of application. What are your thoughts so far on how colored coins has worked for you? Has it been limiting? Is Ethereum something that you might consider in the future? What are your thoughts on the trade-off between the two technologies?
So this is one thing I can answer very definitively. So when we started building this, Ethereum wasn't that big, and there weren't a lot of mature tools to build it. And the most mature tools and the most mature things were colored coins and the Bitcoin blockchain. We are blockchain agnostic, and I think that term is being flown around a lot. We're open to using whatever ones, our customers, if there are specific clients that say, we're not using Bitcoin, we won't do this, but we still want to work with you to build our system, do that. We're very open to using Ethereum, we're very open to using Bitcoin. Rootstock is coming out in terms of potentially with smart contracts on the Bitcoin blockchain. So did we lose me? We're absolutely blockchain agnostic, and we would we'll use whatever tools we end up using and whichever ones are the best. But at the time of building the system a couple months ago, that was, the best system, that was the best tools that were out there at the time. Is that good? That makes sense?
Great answer. Thanks, Matt. Is there anything else you want to tell us that somehow got left out? I'll give you some closing time to wrap it up with whatever you want.
Yeah. No, I don't really have very much else other than, I think that all title and all ownership of different types of assets, whether it be stocks or bonds or a title, will be recorded onto the blockchain and in a very robust and transparent way as we see this technology continue to grow tremendously over the next 5, 10, 15 years, much like the internet grew in the mid to late 90s, where people were starting e-commerce sites and they go, we're not going to buy and sell things on the internet. And then 10, 15 years later, everyone's buying and selling things on the internet. And so we see this as a very, very early stage way of potentially representing the ownership of title, and we're probably going to pivot a bunch of times to see where we can add value the most and what different types of features. We've already pivoted a couple times, and we'll see how it evolves. This is kind of unrelated to this, but you guys are in Santa Cruz, which is fairly close to San Francisco, right?
Yeah, we're about an hour south of San Francisco.
Okay, cool. Well, this is kind of a plug. The D10E conference, D10E.org, is coming up in San Francisco July 19th and 20th. And I'm there, I'm running it right now. So would love to have you guys come out and participate. And we're going to be confirming a lot of really awesome speakers in the next week or two. So I got to get I have your email. We can get you guys a discount code for tickets.
That'd be great. You could join the meetup and then post it on meetup.com, or you could email me and I can forward it to the members. Either way.
Yeah. Put it out there in your network of blockchain and those different types of people out in on the West Coast.
All right, Matt. Thank you very much for joining us. That's fascinating stuff, and we look forward to hearing more from you about the D10E conference and about how things develop at Ubitquity as you guys move forward.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on. And thanks for all of the very, very detailed, good questions. They're tough questions, but it makes sense to ask those. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks.
Take care, Matt. Bye.
Bye.